Hello, welcome to another episode of Inspiring Young Men to Integrity with Binyam. We are in the series of Prerequisites for Integrity. I've gone through quite a few already, and we are currently working through empathy today. So thanks for being with us. Let me know what you think of that new intro music. I've had that on cue for quite some time. I just haven't quite implemented it yet, but I like it. It always makes me smile, and I thought this would be an appropriate cue intro for this podcast. Integrity in relation to empathy. Empathy as a prerequisite for integrity. I titled it The Void of Emotional Intelligence Amongst Young Men Who Struggle. And today I want to talk about 10 key reasons why young men struggle to express emotions and exhibit empathy. I want to sort of work through some of the understanding and addressing the challenges that are inherent for us as young men, us again, including me. Yes, I'm including myself amongst you, and how we can go about developing emotional intelligence and empathy, because it's not one of those things I think that's intuitive. It's one of those things that we have to intentionally think through and then approach. But let's maybe start off with a working definition for empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share feelings of others as if you yourself were feeling them. It's kind of like putting yourself in someone else's shoes, seeing the experience of another from their perspective. It takes energy to express empathy, because you're not only thinking about yourself and what your experience is, but you're also thinking about what it looks like from someone else's and how you can go about engaging on that front. So what does that look like, and how does one approach it? Part of this consideration in the definition, it helps us, I guess, have a better understanding of how we can also promote, more understanding and more compassion. I think a lot of us, at the very heart of it, we just want connection. We want to feel like we're a part of. We want to feel that someone understands us and sees us, and that we're meaningfully connecting with others, right? And I think for us as young men, the big challenge, the big frustration, especially in our navigation through life, it's not being understood. It's that frustration of no one understands me, and I'm not understanding others around me. And there's this block, it seems. There's just this barrier. Remember, if you would, once upon a time when you were a teenager. And as a teenager, one of your biggest frustrations was with your parents, because they just didn't seem to understand you, nor you them. And it didn't seem like there was any extension of them trying to understand your perspectives, your interests, your concerns. And there was just that block there that broke the connection, right? There wasn't that feeling of compassion or understanding that was inherent there. Consider even further when you maybe got into a romantic relationship and it was going good and wonderful until you just didn't understand what your partner was looking for or trying to communicate or trying to emphasize, and it just seemed like you're talking and speaking in different languages. It seemed like that, even though you're still speaking the same language, because you just couldn't connect or understand or empathize with that person. And so that's the necessity for talking about this as a prerequisite for one who wants to strive to live with integrity. It's really important to see the correlation here. For us, as we try to live with integrity, and that's the whole theme of why I'm making these addresses to you, young men, is to inspire you towards integrity. But this is an important prerequisite, because with this prerequisite comes the ability to also understand those around you, how to be able to still know what your values and your moral framework that you subscribe to is, while also communicating to others and saying, I'm not sure that I have experienced what you have, but I can see how that can be frustrating, or I can see how this can be concerning or worrying or whatever else it is that they're trying to express to you. So this leads to, again, a greater understanding, compassion, connection, and to for one to exercise empathy in their lives, it's really necessary to understand that this is an infusion of energy. It takes work to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. It takes restraint for you to like stop wanting to like speak your truth and sort of like negate theirs or neglect theirs because you just want to be heard. It takes that balance of fairness in saying, hey, let's both contribute in this conversation and make sure that we're both feeling like we're heard and understood. But we have 10 reasons, key reasons why young men specifically struggle with empathy, with growing in emotional intelligence. And those 10 start off with the first one, and that's the traditional gender roles and societal expectations that we grow up with. Here we are discouraged from a very young age in expressing emotions or empathy because this is seen as weakness. When we express emotions, we're taught, hey, toughen up. And there's a whole bunch of like really derogatory phrases that I'm not going to repeat, but I think that you'll be familiar with, and even they're coming to your recollection with reference to these traditional gender roles that we've grown up with, these societal expectations that we've imbibed. So not only are we taught that expressing emotions is a sign of weakness, but we're also taught from a very young age that we need to be tough and we need to be stoic. We need to sort of mask our emotions and not let anything through, like whether it's good or bad. We just gotta like present this facade that nothing affects us, and that when we express sensitivity, that's seen as feminine, and that's kind of beaten out of us. And I'm not sure if you can relate with me this way. This is sort of part of my experience in my growth through masculinity. And the paradox of this, when we're taught that expressing emotions, expressing sensitivity is weak and it's feminine, and we're supposed to be showing strength and stoicism by way of just a lack of expressing emotion, and that's what we're being taught. But the paradox and the point that it hits even closer to home is that real strength and courage is actually seen in those who have access to expressing their emotions and their feelings and their sensitivities. That is what takes true courage. Now, I just wanted to note that I'm not even trying to do any spin narrative here, where you're trying to rewrite the story and saying actually what they're saying is really weak is actually strength and you're trying to like convince. No, this is actually real confidence. It takes more confidence to be able to be in touch and aware of where one's experiences and emotions are, and even far more courage to be able to say, I'm feeling vulnerable, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling scared. Like that takes tremendous courage. And the narrative amongst societal expectations that says men shouldn't be weak by expressing emotions is actually weakness. That is weakness because you are not stepping up to the courageous opportunity to say, I'm going to express what's inside here even though it makes me feel vulnerable. It's the one that says, I'm just going to stifle this and pretend it's not there. That isn't courage at all. That is, in fact, neglect of your personal mental health and your well-being emotionally. And it's repressive and suppressive on so many fronts in your evolution of who you could be as a young man. And so young man, I would say if you're subscribing to that narrative that says, I just got to button it all down and shove it down in and not let anyone see it, that really isn't courageous. That isn't really strength on display. That's actually neglect of yourself. What's really more powerful is for you to get in touch with who you are, to learn how to express it, because that is courageous. That is courageous to be able to like walk authentically. That is courageous for you to be able to express those things that are scary. That is where true courage is. And so I'd want to rewrite that narrative, and I want to compel you to consider and step up to the challenge of what does it take for me to know who I am and to know how to communicate that and to be able to know how I set my boundaries and how I navigate while still keeping safe, but still being open to expressing your vulnerabilities and your emotions and your sensitivities and seeing that as a real growth in your character. That's where true courage is. So the first I said is traditional gender roles and societal expectations, which have been really unhelpful. In fact, they've been quite damaging. Secondly, I would say it's the fact that so many of us young men do not have positive role models in culture at large who can exhibit and exemplify what emotional intelligence looks like, or even what expressions of empathy from a masculine perspective look like. We don't have those positive role models in an abundance. In fact, we barely have any, even if we do, that reach the mass of us culturally. And so this makes it really difficult for us to learn how to not only watch, but imitate and emulate those that we admire. Who are those heroes that we have that exemplify this? If you have any that you know of right off the bat, I would love for you to prove me wrong on this and drop me in the comments some of those individuals that I can look up. But from my vantage point, I'm not seeing any significant role models publicly that are massively influencing many young men for positive change in saying, here's what it looks like for us to be in touch with our emotions and to present masculinity with this front of emotional intelligence and empathy on display. And so in the absence that I'm perceiving of such individuals, young men, what I would encourage you to consider doing is start looking for them in your immediate community. We think that we have to only let those who are who's who be able to influence us, when in reality we've got some fantastic gems of individuals in our sphere of community that we can access, that we can have actual access to. Your heroes, those sports stars and the movie stars and whoever else that and music stars even, who you highly look up to and admire, you don't even have access to them. But who are the people in your life currently that you honor and respect, that you're like, hey, I want to be like that guy when I grow up? Who are the hard workers? Who are the ones that are feeding their families? Who are the ones that are involved in their communities? Who are the ones that you resonate with, saying, okay, that person, he's straight up good. Maybe you work with them. Maybe they're your neighbor. Perhaps they're the shopkeeper who you go and buy your magazines or whatever from. Like, who are those individuals that you can identify that you have access to? And if there are those individuals in your life, I would challenge you to go to those individuals and say, hey, I would like to learn what it looks like to grow in this area of empathy and emotional intelligence, and I think that you have some insights that I could maybe benefit from. I would challenge you to make that explicit to them, saying, I want to learn from you in this department. Don't just say, I want to hang out, and just, no, make it more specific and intentional when you're saying to them, I want to learn what this looks like, and I'd like your help if you're willing. Make that an explicit request so that they're not missing the point at all. That's really helpful for you guys to both make some traction and progression in helpful ways. Third, I've avoided talking about this for quite some time now because it's a very well used term that many of us are familiar with, but I just don't want to overuse it. But this third one is toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity that prioritizes aggression and displays of power over emotional sensitivity and vulnerability. Here, I think so many of us can identify with this expression of a masculinity looks like. I actually saw a really unfortunate and unhappy example of it yesterday while I was at the transit station. And while I was there, I observed this group, maybe about 15 to 20 young boys. They were young boys. They were probably like ages, 8 to like 13 or 14. And they were loud, they were brash, they were vulgar. Like they were like a nuisance, they were just kind of like a mob mentality sort. And as they came into the space that we're all sort of hanging on and waiting for our train, they were, they were just really abrasive and abusive in the way they were talking to each other and with each other. And they were, they was just harsh the way that they were seeing the interaction, the way one would see their interactions with each other. And it just made me really sad because I was wondering, who are the role models that could tap through and influence these young minds? Because the trajectory they're on right now, the future looks bleak. The future looks bleak for them, and I feel for them. And this is why I'm making these addresses again to you, young man. One, because I've seen that I have had some influence with you specifically in ways that I did not anticipate or expect. It still blows me away when you, young men, stop me on the street here in the city that I live in, or drop me a message in the DMs, or drop a comment, just communicating how much you've been impacted by my example, if you will. And it just amazes me because I didn't think of myself as one who could relate to you guys. But I still don't understand it, and yet there it is. And I'm grateful that I have that influence, but I want to be very specific in the way I wield that influence. And that's why we're talking about integrity and how we can challenge many of these unhelpful forms that we've learned and imbibed in our expression of what masculinity looks like. This is why I want to inspire young men to integrity. I want to inspire you because I want to light a flame for you of what could be as you learn and think about committing your life on this trajectory, this course that is going to transform you from the inside out in really magnificent ways that enhances your opportunities and your experiences in life. That's why I'm doing this. So in regards to toxic masculinity that prioritizes this aggression and power instead of sensitivity and vulnerability, I would encourage you to initiate conversations amongst your friends about talking on this theme of toxic masculinity. What does that look like? How do we experience it? How do we participate in it? What are the things that we see in our expression communally together that lend to this? Talk about this not only with your guy friends, but talk about this with even the ladies in your friend groups as well. Talk about this whenever you have that opportunity to be able to say, how can we be more intentional about thinking of how we engage socially? And where are these expressions of toxic masculinity coming up and finding their reference point? Consider those as an initiating part of that conversation. Let's move on to number 4. Number 4 is the experience that so many of us have had with trauma in our childhood years and terrible experiences that have impacted us when we were young. This impacts our emotional regulation and impairs the development of what empathy could look like. In this department, I would say so many of us sort of stifle those experiences and emotions and memories down because we don't want to, it's painful for us to remember that season once upon a time. And as we do that, we repress and we neglect. What really is necessary is for us to express it. And that's not easy. And so that not being easy because not many of us have learned how to communicate what's going on with those big emotions on the inside. And it's just kind of scary and we just would rather avoid it. Look for those who can help you to process them. And for many of us, I would say, I would highly encourage professional psychiatrists and therapists and counselors who have the skills to help us start unpacking what those experiences were and helping us process them so that we can take away the power that these painful experiences have had, so that now we can reflect on how we can grow as a result of those experiences that we once had. So we don't have to stay kind of stuck and immobilized by those impacting experiences we once had in our young years. There are ways for us to even address those and work through those that enhance and enable us to experience a deeper sense of integrity by practicing empathy. But these experiences from once upon a time could be a block for us in trying to experience empathy in this present moment as we connect with those in our community. Number 5, the schools and education systems that we've gone through that do not prioritize or provide specific attention to emotional intelligence and its development. For so many of us, I guess there's an argument to be made by many that would say that's not the job of schools or these education systems. But that's where we're really learning a lot, not only about, life and stuff and concepts and ideas, but also how we engage socially. And so if you're still in those settings where you're learning, or even if you're in the setting at work, in your career, whatever that looks like, what would it look like for you to prioritize for yourself your emotional evolution, taking that into your own hands? What would it look like? Perhaps maybe it would entail those that you connect with already, gathering them together and saying, hey, can we make this a part of our focus? How can we collectively grow in our experience of emotional intelligence? How can we get to be better versions of ourselves, even as we spend time together in community, in whatever capacity, whether it's personal or professional? How can we attend to this element so that we can grow through this? And we're, in essence, redeeming that for ourselves again. Number six is negative media portrayals of men as insensitive and unemotional. We're learning to critically analyze the media that we're consuming today. There's awareness of, hey, there's so much available for us to consume and take in, but now we're being a lot more judicious on what are we gonna invest our time in. For some, they love watching movies. For others, they love scrolling through social media. For yet others, they love engaging in online games or chats or whatever it is. But how can we consider the media's presentation of masculinity, especially in the zone where we're portrayed as insensitive and unemotional? How can we learn to observe those impressions and expressions and to challenge them and to critically analyze those messages that are being fed our way, because they're really harmful stereotypes that are being that are being pushed on us? And how can we learn not only to analyze these messages, but also to learn how to reject those themes that are really unhelpful for us to grow to be aware and emotionally accessible? And we can inject these reflections even as we engage in conversations about our favorite movies or shows or things that we've been consuming through media. We can infuse those reflections saying, man, I love this movie, but I didn't like how they presented us as just unfeeling and like insensitive, and the way that we're abrasive, and like these things I want to challenge, for example. And what does that look like for me as I'm considering that message of taking the things that I like, but also shifting the proposed damaging, harmful stereotypes to something else that I want to imbibe? How can we incorporate that into our reflections as we interact and share with one another? Number 7, I believe, is what we're on now. Number 7 is the culture of competition that prioritizes winning through aggressive behavior and how else can I say this? And through like sort of in your face challenges that say, like, trash talking, if you will. You're nothing, you're like terrible, like all of those expressions. And some would argue this is a really important component of competition and how you intimidate your opponent or that kind of thing. And there's some sports especially that glorify and celebrate like fights and this aggressiveness, and I struggle with those. I really struggle with those because I'm wondering, what are we teaching ourselves is okay? Why is it okay in this setting here but not outside of this setting? Why are we okay with expressing frustrations on the sports field or in competitive areas that is really harmful that we would discourage outside of those settings? I don't get it. That's not sportsmanship for me, and I'm really trying to figure out why that's okay there but not in other settings. So I don't quite understand much about that, but I still have my take on it, and so I'm still putting it out there. The competition that prioritizes winning at all costs, especially through aggressiveness and lack of humility, it doesn't resonate with me, and I would say it challenges us if we subscribe to that in what integrity looks like. How can you express integrity when you are actively demeaning someone and their abilities? Consider instead practicing what humility and graciousness looks like, even as you remain competitive, even as you pursue being the best you can be. By all means, do so. But why do we have to subscribe to this other mold that is really unhelpful? I don't think we need to. And I would challenge you, young man. I mean, drop me your thoughts in the comments as to why that's okay. But I would argue, why don't we consider humility and graciousness that enables that openness, not only for good, honest competition and striving for and giving our opponents their run for their money, but also doing so in a way that still takes into account empathy. What does it look like to be in that person's shoes? How can you empathize with them and say, hey, keep it up. Like, I'm nervous as well too. I'm trying to figure this out. How can we go through this together? That's really important, I think. Okay, that was a really important one for me, as you could probably sense. Number 8 is growing up in homogenous communities where there's no exposure to diverse perspectives and experiences. Growing up in a setting where everyone thinks like you, everyone looks like you, everyone talks like you, everyone is engaged in the same things that you are. And as you are in these settings, you just find it more difficult to think through what does it feel for someone who is not from this background or setting, and how can you expand that experience. So I would suggest maybe considering the work that you do, work in places where you have access to diverse group of people who think differently or who look differently or who have different religious or commitments or different political leanings. What does it look like for you to put yourself in the midst of diversity so that you can learn different perspectives, not so you can argue with them and like prove them wrong, but more so that you can understand where they're coming from. Maybe if it isn't in the work front, consider what it would look like for you to volunteer in those settings, or even to intersect socially by joining a group of common with those with common interests but have diverse backgrounds. What does that look like for you to grow up in diverse setting, or to have access to those experiences, and by intentionally putting yourself in there so that you can learn what life looks like from those who have a different vantage point than you do, and thereby have the opportunity to practice deepening integrity through empathy. Number 9, lack of access to adequate mental health. This is a really significant one for so many of us who are feeling, I don't have the resources, I don't have the money to go and hire like a therapist or a psychologist. I don't have the capacity to, or the resources to access a psychologist or someone who can help me work through these challenges that I'm having. So, I mean, we all need support and we all need help, and sometimes that help seems inaccessible. So my suggestions here would be consider looking for some help that the government or other organizations might offer, where it brings down the cost or perhaps even pays for those opportunities for you to access this. Consider, even if that's difficult, looking for online forums that are helpful. Now, be judicious because there's so much on the internet, but looking for resources online that could help facilitate that. That could be in the form of not only chat groups or Facebook groups, but maybe even reading and listening to and watching videos of book reviews that others have done on the topic of what this looks like to grow in emotional intelligence and empathy and mental health, and considering and collating by networking this way, finding out, hey, there's a lot of people talking about this book, or this one seems to have impacted so many, and then investing in those for yourself and reading or watching those resources that enable you to grow in your awareness and start at least embarking on some ideas of how to progress forward in attending to your own mental health this way. Consider even further not only books and these online resources and groups, but also consider joining a 12-step program. This may be an unusual suggestion for many of you because you're like, ooh, that's kind of weird. I don't think I struggle that way. But there are groups, so many varieties and expressions of 12-step groups that focus on specific things, especially in relation to how they can grow personally. And so consider what's available to you in your area that you're in that could help facilitate, because it's great when you find a community of like-minded people that are rowing in the same direction that you can join up with and experience mutual collaboration as you attend to your own health that way. Number 10, this is quite a list here. Lack of opportunities to connect with like-minded people because you're like, I don't think there's anyone who's interested in this kind of stuff, like in actually working on and navigating themes of integrity through empathy and emotional intelligence. So if you're finding that there aren't many in your community who are interested this way, look around for other communities that you can join up with. It's especially helpful if you live in a big city area, or close proximity to, because there's plenty of opportunities usually in those settings. If not, consider online groups again that can facilitate, because there you can find specific groups and niches that of people that are interested in these topics, and you can find your community and online support there. Also consider if you're an extrovert versus an introvert. If you're an extrovert, consider wielding your ability socially to bring this to the attention of your community and influencing others to roll with you together on these explorations. If you're an introvert, however, be careful about the company you keep, because we're all being influenced, and so it's really important. If you're an introvert, that's not a bad thing, but it's really critical that you're aware of where your influences are coming from primarily, and how you can address those. So knowing our moral compass, considering our impact on others, and understanding others' perspectives, this trifecta of knowing your values, your moral compass, considering your impact that you have on others, being aware of that, and understanding others' perspectives really helps one grow in their engagement with integrity, especially through empathy. And that's why this is really critical. And I would say for us as young men, we're feeling very displaced if we don't have access to this point of connection. The very thing that we desire, I started off saying, is this feeling that we are understood and connected. And so empathy is a critical component of our walk towards integrity, especially for us as young men, because there's a huge struggle predominantly for so many young men. And so if you're listening to me and this is resonating, I'd love to hear more questions of things or ideas or suggestions that may be helpful for you. Drop me a line down below. If you've not already done so, I'd love for you to subscribe and be a part of this community that I'm building as we move towards what could be in our expression of men who value and exemplify walking with integrity. Let's change the world together. So subscribe. I will see you guys on the next video. For now, have a fantastic day, and grow for your own sake, especially with integrity in relation to empathy, our topic today. Chat soon.